Inside the tiny vessel sat two travelers of vastly different temperaments. One was a young boy named Koby, whose bright pink hair and round glasses framed a face perpetually etched with anxiety and apprehension. He was a timid soul who had only recently been liberated from the cruel servitude of a pirate crew, and his ultimate dream was to join the ranks of the Marines, the global military force tasked with maintaining peace. Sitting opposite him was a boy composed entirely of boundless optimism and supernatural elasticity. This was Monkey D. Luffy, a youth who wore a simple red vest, a pair of sandals, and a beloved straw hat. Luffy possessed a body made of rubber, a miraculous trait gained from eating a mystical devil fruit, and he carried within his heart an unwavering, almost incomprehensible dream to become the next king of the pirates. Their destination lay on the horizon, slowly coming into focus as the sea breeze pushed their little boat forward. It was Shellstown, a fortified coastal settlement renowned for housing a prominent marine. The sun hung high in the azure sky, casting brilliant diamond-like reflections across the surface of the east blue. Inside the tiny vessel sat two travelers of vastly different temperaments. One was a young boy named Koby, whose bright pink hair and round glasses framed a face perpetually etched with anxiety and apprehension. He was a timid soul who had only recently been liberated from the cruel servitude of a pirate crew, and his ultimate dream was to join the ranks of the Marines, the global military force tasked with maintaining peace. Sitting opposite him was a boy composed entirely of boundless optimism and supernatural elasticity. This was Monkey D. Luffy, a youth who wore a simple red vest, a pair of sandals, and a beloved straw hat. Luffy possessed a body made of rubber, a miraculous trait gained from eating a mystical devil fruit, and he carried within his heart an unwavering, almost incomprehensible dream to become the next king of the pirates. Their destination lay on the horizon, slowly coming into focus as the sea breeze pushed their little boat forward. It was Shellstown, a fortified coastal settlement renowned for housing a prominent marine base. The town itself was a picturesque port, bustling with agrarian workers, fishermen, and merchants, but an undeniable shadow hung over its cobblestone streets. As the boat docked at the wharf, the sounds of the bustling market were immediately apparent, yet there was a stifling undercurrent of fear woven into the daily lives of the citizenry. Luffy's objective in visiting this specific island was not to plunder or pillage, but to seek out a legendary figure. He was searching for a man known throughout the East Blue as a fearsome pirate hunter, a master swordsman named Roronoa Zoro. Luffy, operating on pure instinct and a relentless desire to build a pirate crew of his own, had decided that this notorious bounty hunter would make the perfect first mate. As Luffy and Koby walked through the winding streets of Shellstown, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The town was dominated by the architecture of the 153rd Marine Branch, a massive, imposing fortress situated at the center of the settlement. The base was a daunting structure, its perimeter defined by high stone walls, while the central tower was adorned with power plant-shaped battlements and heavy artillery cannons pointed outward. Every time Luffy casually mentioned the name Roronoa Zoro or the local marine commander, Captain Morgan, the nearby townspeople would recoil in absolute terror, their eyes darting nervously toward the towering fortress. The mere utterance of these names was enough to induce a state of sheer panic among the populace. it became abundantly clear to the travelers that this was not a town protected by the Marines, but rather a town held hostage by them. Driven by insatiable curiosity, Luffy led the trembling Koby to the high exterior wall of the Marine base. Finding a foothold, the two boys hoisted themselves up to peer over the stone barricade, looking down into the expansive, sun-baked dirt courtyard that served as the base's prisoner yard. The heat of the day radiated from the dry earth, creating shimmering heat waves in the air. There, in the dead center of the vast, empty execution ground, stood the man they had come to find. Roronoa Zoro was firmly bound to a heavy wooden cross. Thick, coarse ropes bit deeply into his muscular arms and torso, securing him tightly against the timber. He wore his signature dark green haramaki around his waist, dark trousers, a white shirt, and a dark green bandana tied firmly around his head. His face was shadowed, but the intensity of his presence was palpable even from a distance. He possessed the hardened, scarred physique of a warrior who had survived countless battles. Koby whimpered, his knuckles white as he gripped the stone wall. The legends of the pirate hunter painted him as a bloodthirsty demon, a ruthless killer who hunted outlaws for mere sport. Seeing him in person, even bound and defenseless, did nothing to alleviate Koby's profound terror. Luffy, however, simply tilted his head, his wide eyes reflecting nothing but pure, unadulterated fascination. Zoro slowly lifted his head, the blazing sun illuminating his fierce, unwavering gaze. He locked eyes with the two boys peering over the wall. His voice, though dry and raspy from severe dehydration, carried a sharp, commanding edge. He did not ask for their assistance, nor did he beg for water. Instead, in a display of sheer, stubborn pride, he immediately ordered the two strangers to leave him alone and get lost. But Luffy was not a boy who took orders. He remained perched on the wall, his curiosity only deepened. How could a man so fearsome end up tied to a wooden pole in the middle of a Marine base? What kind of crime could warrant such agonizing, prolonged punishment under the scorching sun? As the midday heat continued to beat down upon the courtyard, the heavy silence was broken by a small, unexpected sound. The wooden gates of the courtyard creaked open just enough for a tiny figure to slip through. It was a young girl from the town, no older than 7 or 8, named Rika. She moved with desperate stealth, her small footsteps kicking up little puffs of dust as she cautiously approached the crucified swordsman. Koby gasped from his vantage point on the wall, terrified that the child would be spotted by the Marine guards. Zoro, hearing the approaching footsteps, opened his eyes and stared down at the small girl standing before him. Rika reached into her small apron and produced a carefully wrapped package. With trembling hands, she unveiled 2 handmade onigiri, white rice balls, carefully shaped and wrapped in crisp seaweed. She held them up toward Zoro, her voice soft but filled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She knew he had been bound to the cross for days without a single drop of water or a morsel of food, and she had risked her own life to bring him sustenance. Zoro glared down at the rice balls, his stomach undoubtedly twisted with agonizing hunger, but his pride and his concern for the child's safety won out. He gruffly told her to take the food away, warning her that if the Marines caught her, she would be severely punished. He refused the food, acting the part of the terrifying demon to scare her into fleeing back to the safety of the town. Before Rika could retreat, a new, highly unpleasant voice echoed across the courtyard. The heavy gates swung wide open, and in stride a young man accompanied by a detachment of armed marine guards. This was Helmeppo, the deeply spoiled, cowardly, and snobbish son of the base commander, Captain Morgan. Helmeppo was a man who possessed no inherent strength or honor of his own, relying entirely on the nepotistic shield of his father's rank to bully and terrorize those weaker than himself. He wore a garish, overly tailored suit and sported a ridiculous bowl-cut hairstyle, his face twisted into a perpetual arrogant sneer. Helmeppo marched directly up to the cross, his eyes falling upon the small girl and the food she held. With a cruel, mocking laugh, he snatched the onigiri directly from Rika's small hands. Rika cried out in protest, but Helmeppo merely grinned. He held the rice balls up, inspecting them with feigned disgust. He proclaimed that the food was inadequate, mocking the child's effort. Then, in a display of petty, calculated cruelty, Helmeppo dropped the onigiri down onto the dusty ground of the courtyard. He raised his heavy leather boot and stomped down hard, grinding the pristine white rice and seaweed deep into the dirt and mud. Rika burst into tears, her heart breaking as she watched her hard work and her offering of gratitude be so callously destroyed. Helmeppo laughed at her misery, reminding her that aiding a prisoner of the state was a severe crime. He callously ordered one of his marine subordinates to forcefully eject the weeping child out of the compound. The guard, bound by the rigid, terrifying hierarchy of the base, complied, tossing the crying girl out of the compound. Helmeppo turned his attention back to Zoro, gloating over the swordsman's helpless state, before eventually turning on his heel and marching back out of the courtyard, leaving Zoro alone once more with the crushed remnants of the food at his feet. It was then that Luffy dropped down from the wall and landed lightly in the dirt courtyard. He walked slowly toward the cross, his eyes fixed on the ruined, dirt-covered rice. Zoro, breathing heavily, looked down at the boy in the straw hat. The pirate hunter's voice was low, stripped of its previous hostility. He made a completely unexpected request. He asked Luffy to gather the crushed, mud-stained rice from the ground and feed it to him. Luffy knelt in the dirt, carefully scraping the ruined food from the earth, and held it up to Zoro's mouth. Zoro consumed the soil-contaminated sustenance without a single moment of hesitation, chewing the gritty, sandy rice with fierce determination. When he had swallowed the last bite, a small, genuine smile crossed the swordsman's scarred face. He looked at Luffy and asked him to deliver a message to the little girl. "Tell her," Zoro said, his voice carrying the weight of profound sincerity, "that it was delicious." In that singular moment, Luffy understood everything he needed to know about Roronoa Zoro. The man bound to the cross was not a bloodthirsty demon or a heartless killer. He was a warrior of immense honor, a man who would willingly eat dirt to ensure that a child's kindness was not wasted. Luffy leapt back over the wall, rejoining Koby, and the two boys quickly located Rika to pass along Zoro's message of gratitude. The little girl's tears were instantly replaced by a brilliant, joyous smile. She led the two travelers away from the looming shadow of the marine base and into the relative safety of the civilian district. Sitting in the safety of a local building, Rika began to weave the true tale of Roronoa Zoro's capture, revealing the dark history of the town's suffering. The town of Shellstown was suffocating under the iron-fisted rule of Captain Morgan, a man who governed not by the principles of justice, but by absolute terror. Morgan was a tyrant who demanded that his citizens and his subordinates bow to his every whim, executing anyone who dared to question his authority. Because of this atmosphere of paralyzing fear, his son, Helmeppo, was allowed to roam the streets with impunity, treating the townspeople as his personal playthings. Rika explained that Helmeppo owned a massive, hostile wolf pet named Zoro. Zoro was a terrifying beast with light brown fur, piercing yellow eyes, and sharp, drooling jaws. Helmeppo would regularly unleash this feral animal into the streets, laughing as the townspeople scattered in terror. One fateful day, Helmeppo had swaggered into the local tavern, a warm, welcoming establishment owned and operated by Rika's mother, Ririka. Helmeppo did not come alone. He brought the snarling Zoro right through the swinging wooden doors of the bar. The tavern immediately erupted into a state of panic. The wolf leapt onto the tables, aggressively attacking the terrified customers and devouring their food. Rika, desperate to protect her mother's livelihood, bravely grabbed a broom and attempted to shoo the massive beast away, but her efforts only served to anger the animal. Zoro turned its yellow eyes toward the little girl, baring its fangs and preparing to strike. It was in that split second of ultimate peril that the tavern doors flew open. Roronoa Zoro, who had been quietly enjoying a drink in the corner, moved with the speed of a striking viper. Recognizing the immediate danger to the innocent child and the paralyzed patrons, Zoro did not draw his legendary blades. Instead, he grabbed a heavy wooden chair and brought it crashing down over the wolf's head. The wood splintered upon impact, and the terrifying beast slumped to the floor, knocked completely unconscious. The tavern fell dead silent. Zoro had saved the little girl and the patrons, but he had committed the ultimate sin in Shellstown. He had defied the Morgan family. Helmeppo, his face red with a mixture of shock and fury, immediately retaliated. He leveraged the full weight of his father's military apparatus, threatening to order the immediate execution of Rika, her mother Ririka, and every single customer present in the bar. Zoro, standing amidst the wreckage of the tavern, looked at the terrified faces of the innocent townspeople. He knew he possessed the martial skill to cut his way out of the town, to slaughter the guards and escape into the wilderness, but doing so would leave the defenseless citizens to face Morgan's wrath. And so, a cruel, twisted bargain was struck. Helmeppo issued an ultimatum. If Zoro surrendered himself peacefully to the Marines and allowed himself to be bound to a wooden cross in the courtyard for exactly 1 month, Helmeppo would issue a full pardon. If Zoro could survive 30 days without food or water, he would be set free, and the lives of the bar's patrons would be spared. Driven by his unyielding code of honor, Zoro accepted the terms. He traded his own freedom and his own physical well-being to shield a tavern full of strangers from a tyrant's wrath. As Rika finished her tale, the heavy weight of Zoro's sacrifice settled over Luffy and Koby. The pirate hunter was not a demon. He was a man bearing the burden of a town's survival on his shoulders. Suddenly, a commotion from the street outside drew their attention. Through the window, they saw Helmeppo strutting down the cobblestone road, flanked by his ever-present Marine guards. He was boasting loudly, his squeaky, arrogant voice carrying through the air for all to hear. Helmeppo was laughing. He was bragging to his sycophantic followers about the foolishness of the swordsman in the courtyard. With a cruel, twisted grin, Helmeppo publicly revealed the truth behind the bargain. He had absolutely no intention of keeping his promise. 1 month? Helmeppo cackled, his voice dripping with malice. Did he really think I was going to let him go? I'm going to have him executed in 3 days. It was all a trick to get him to tie himself up. The revelation struck the air like a physical blow. Helmeppo was casually violating the sacred oath that had convinced Zoro to surrender his freedom. For Monkey D. Luffy, a boy whose entire worldview was built upon the absolute sanctity of promises, dreams, and personal honor, this casual perjury was an unforgivable moral transgression. The philosophy of the Pirate King was one of freedom, but it was also one of profound loyalty to one's word. To use a promise as a weapon of deceit was an insult to everything Luffy held dear. Without a word, Luffy pushed open the door and stepped out into the bright sunlight of the street. He walked directly toward the boosting commander's son. Helmeppo barely had time to register the approaching boy in the straw hat before the world exploded. Luffy drew his fist back and unleashed a devastating, bone-rattling punch directly into Helmeppo's face. The impact sent the spoiled aristocrat flying backward, sprawling violently onto the cobblestones. The sheer kinetic force of the blow echoed through the silent street. The Marine guards froze in absolute shock. No one, absolutely no one, dared to strike the son of Captain Morgan. Helmeppo scrambled backward in the dirt, clutching his bruised and bleeding face. Tears streamed down his cheeks as the reality of physical pain registered in his pampered mind. "You hit me!" he wailed, his voice cracking with terror and disbelief. "I'm going to tell my father. He'll kill you. He'll kill all of you." Luffy stood his ground, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with an intense, unyielding fire. "Go ahead and tell him," Luffy challenged, his voice steady and resolute. Helmeppo scrambled to his feet and fled toward the Marine base as fast as his legs could carry him, screaming for his father's vengeance. Luffy turned back to Koby, his trademark wide grin returning to his face. The decision was absolute and final. Roronoa Zoro was a man of honor, and Luffy was going to make him his crewmate. But a swordsman without his swords was like a bird without wings. Luffy cracked his knuckles and declared his next course of action. He was going to break into the Marine base, find Zoro's confiscated katanas, and liberate the pirate hunter. Within the towering walls of the 153rd branch, the true horror of the regime was physically manifest in the form of Captain Morgan. He was a terrifying giant of a man, an intimidating figure whose very appearance inspired dread. His most striking feature was the heavy, bolted steel brace that completely encased his lower jaw, a metallic orthotic that locked his face into a permanent, unyielding scowl. He wore a billowing, dark Marine captain's coat draped over his broad shoulders like a cape, but tellingly, the traditional emblem of justice was entirely absent from the back of his uniform. However, the true source of his terrifying moniker lay at the end of his right arm. Where his hand should have been, a massive, heavy steel axe was permanently grafted to his forearm, the steel handle running directly through the bone and muscle. This was Axe Hand Morgan, a man who equated military rank with divine right. Morgan's tyrannical narcissism was currently focused on the highest rooftop of the central base tower. He stood with his arms crossed, an unlit cigar clamped in his teeth, aggressively overseeing a massive construction project. Dozens of terrified, sweating Marine subordinates were straining against thick hemp ropes, operating heavy pulley systems. They were hoisting a gargantuan bronze statue of Captain Morgan himself. This obnoxiously massive statue, forged in the exact likeness of the axe-hand tyrant, was designed to be placed at the very pinnacle of the fortress. It was a monument to his inflated ego, intended to cast a literal and metaphorical shadow over the entire island of Shellstown, a permanent reminder of his unbreakable authority. "Pull!" Morgan roared, his voice like grinding steel. "Erect the symbol of my greatness. Anyone who scratches it will be executed." Down below, at the base of the towering structure, Luffy was calculating his ascent. The armory, and therefore Zoro's swords, were likely located somewhere within the upper levels of the keep. Running up the stairs would take too much time. Fortunately, Monkey D. Luffy possessed a rather unique method of vertical traversal. Luffy reached out and grabbed two sturdy stone pillars near the base of the tower. He walked backward, planting his feet firmly into the dirt. As he moved back, his arms did not simply pull taut, they stretched. They elongated like massive, flesh-colored rubber bands, storing an immense amount of potential kinetic energy. "Gum gum!" Luffy chanted, his voice echoing across the courtyard. He lifted his feet from the ground. The sudden release of tension propelled him forward with explosive ballistic force. "Rocket!" Luffy shot skyward like a cannonball, his body hurtling up the side of the towering fortress at terrifying speed. The wind roared in his ears as he ascended higher and higher, aiming for the roof. However, Luffy's aerial navigation was famously imprecise. As he crested the edge of the rooftop, he realized his trajectory was angled slightly too high. He soared gracefully over the battlements and collided directly at the apex of the monumental bronze statue that was just being secured into place. The impact of the flying rubber boy was catastrophic. The immense kinetic force struck the massive bronze idol dead center. There was a deafening crack of rending metal. The statue of Captain Morgan snapped completely in half. The upper torso of the bronze tyrant separated from its base, tipped backward, and plummeted off the roof. It crashed onto the stone flagstones below with an earth-shattering boom, shattering into unrecognizable shards of twisted metal. Silence descended upon the rooftop. The straining Marines stared in absolute paralyzed horror at the empty pedestal. Captain Morgan's cigar dropped from his steel jaw. The unbreakable symbol of his absolute authority had been instantly atomized by a laughing boy falling from the sky. Before Morgan could unleash his inevitable murderous fury, Luffy scrambled to his feet. Spotting Helmeppo, who had just arrived on the roof to complain to his father, Luffy lunged forward. Utilizing his elastic limbs, he grabbed the terrified commander's son by the collar, hoisted him into the air, and dragged him rapidly down the nearest stairwell. "You're going to show me where the swords are," Luffy demanded, using the blubbering aristocrat as his personal captive tour guide through the labyrinthine corridors of the base. While the entire military apparatus of the 153rd Branch was thrown into absolute chaos by the destruction of the statue and the subsequent manhunt for the rubber boy, a completely different kind of infiltration was occurring in the shadows. Moving with the silent grace of a ghost, a young woman navigated the lower corridors of the Marine fortress. She had bright orange hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, and she moved with the practiced confidence of a master thief. This was the same resourceful girl who had only days prior covertly robbed the heavily guarded ship of the Alvida pirates. Her name was Nami. a highly skilled cat burglar whose primary operational directive was the systematic theft of capital and navigational charts from pirates and corrupt authorities alike. Nami possessed no magical fruit powers or supernatural strength. She relied on intellect, misdirection, and pure cunning. Recognizing that the loud, destructive distraction caused by the boy in the straw hat had drawn all the guards toward the upper levels, Nami slipped effortlessly through the base's security checkpoints. She was searching for something specific, something far more valuable than gold or jewels. She sought the highly coveted maritime charts detailing the treacherous oceanic route known as the Grand Line. While Luffy dismantled the psychological and physical authority of the marine regime with his fists, Nami systematically stripped the base of its material wealth from the shadows, an unseen phantom exploiting the chaos of the revolution. Back in the scorching heat of the dirt courtyard, the timid Koby had reached a profound psychological breaking point. Having witnessed Luffy's absolute, unwavering conviction, Koby realized that he could no longer stand by and allow injustice to occur. Overcoming his deeply ingrained, paralyzing fear of the Marines, Koby sprinted out from his hiding place and ran directly toward the wooden cross where Zoro was bound. Zoro's eyes widened in surprise as the pink-haired boy began frantically tugging at the thick, heavy ropes securing his wrists. "What are you doing, kid?" Zoro rasped, his voice harsh. "Get out of here before they see you." Koby shook his head, tears of desperation and courage streaming down his face. His fingers bled as he tore at the tight knots. "I won't let them do this," Koby cried out. "Helnepo lied to you, Mr. Zoro. He never planned to let you go. They're going to execute you." The revelation hit Zoro like a physical weight. The agonizing days of starvation, the sacrifice he had made to protect the innocent people of the tavern, it had all been for nothing. His honorable agreement had been manipulated by a coward. Before Koby could loosen the final ropes, a chilling metallic clanking echoed across the courtyard. Captain Axe-Hand Morgan, his face twisted in a mask of pure murderous rage, marched into the execution grounds. He was flanked by a full squad of Marine riflemen, their weapons loaded and primed. The destruction of his statue had pushed Morgan over the edge. He was no longer interested in prolonged punishments or theatrical displays of authority. He wanted blood. "Raise aim!" Morgan roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. The Marine riflemen stepped forward, raising their heavy flintlock rifles and leveling the dark iron barrels directly at Zoro and the trembling Koby. Time seemed to slow to a crawl for the bound swordsman. Zoro stared down the barrels of the guns, the mathematical reality of his situation crystallizing in his mind. He was tied to a piece of wood, stripped of his weapons, and exhausted beyond measure. Evasion was biologically impossible. As the shadow of death loomed over him, Zoro's mind flashed back to a moonlit night in Shimotsuki village. He saw the face of Kuina, his childhood friend and greatest rival. He remembered the tears in her eyes as she lamented her perceived weakness, and he remembered the fierce, burning heat of the vow they had sworn together. "Promise me," she remembered her voice in his memory, "someday one of us will be the world's greatest swordsman." "I'll get stronger for both of us," young Zoro had promised, tears streaming down his own face. "I'll be so strong that my name reaches up to the heavens." Zoro gritted his teeth, his muscles straining uselessly against the thick ropes. He could not die here. He refused to die pinned to a wooden post in a dusty courtyard, executed by a corrupt coward. To die here would be a betrayal of the sacred vow he had made to Kuina. His ambition demanded life. "Fire!" Captain Morgan commanded. A deafening roar shattered the silence of the courtyard as the firing squad pulled their triggers. Plumes of acrid gray smoke erupted from the rifle barrels, and a deadly volley of lead projectiles rocketed across the dirt, flying straight toward Zoro and the trembling Koby. Koby squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable lethal impact. Zoro stared defiantly at the approaching death. But the bullets never reached them. In a chaotic blur of motion, a figure dropped from the high window of the Marine base tower, plummeting directly into the line of fire. It was Monkey D. Luffy. In his hands, he tightly gripped 3 distinct sheathed katanas, Zoro's weapons, successfully retrieved from the armory. Luffy landed heavily in the dirt, positioning his body completely between the firing squad and the wooden cross, acting as a human shield. The lead bullet struck Luffy squarely in the chest and torso with terrifying kinetic force. Koby screamed in horror. However, biological reality was suddenly and spectacularly inverted. The bullets did not penetrate flesh or shatter bone. Instead, as the projectile struck Luffy's chest, his skin stretched. The sheer tensile strength of the Gomu Gomu no Mi absorbed the incredible kinetic energy of the gunfire. He held the tension for a fraction of a second, and then his rubber body violently snapped back to its original shape. The physical conservation of energy dictated a miraculous result. The bullets were violently deflected, ricocheting off Luffy's chest and flying back across the courtyard, scattering harmlessly into the dirt around the terrified Marine riflemen. Silence returned to the courtyard, heavier and more profound than before. Captain Morgan's jaw dropped in absolute paralyzed disbelief. The Marines lowered their smoking rifles, their minds unable to process the impossible physics they had just witnessed. Zoro stared at the boy standing before him, the boy who had just casually absorbed a firing squad and survived, the boy who was currently holding out the 3 swords. "I am Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm going to be king of the pirates." The rigid, authoritarian tyranny of Shellstown, built on a foundation of fear, steel, and broken promises, had just collided with the chaotic, unyielding force of true freedom. The legend of the pirate hunter and the boy in the straw hat had officially begun.